you very much for inviting me. I wish I could be with you in person, but it's a great pleasure and a great honor, and I was delighted to be asked to speak. So the title of my talk is rather long, but I think you'll see, I hope, as I go through my talk, why I've chosen this title. So it's collaborative, patient-informed, multi-center randomized controlled trials to resolve long-standing uncertainties in very preterm nutrition. And before I go further, I would like you all to be aware of my disclosures, please. I am the pediatric expert member of the 10-person multidisciplinary Nestle International Scientific Advisory Board, but I refuse all personal remuneration for this role. I'd also like you to be aware of all of the grants that I've held from public bodies, government bodies, charities, and industry. The list of them you can see here, but they include Prolacta Life Sciences, who of course make commercial human milk products. I undertake no contract nutritional research whatsoever, and in the last 5 years, I've received conference travel and accommodation reimbursements from the following organizations. Now, the background to what I want to speak about is that, as you will all know, there's a huge amount of variation in preterm nutritional practice. And the summary statement is that there is also huge uncertainty about the optimal nutritional regimens for preterm babies. There's also, as you all know, a very strong view that nutritional practices influence the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. And so for the last over a decade, one of the focuses of my research group is to address the problem of the lack of a good evidence base, and to ask the question, how can the evidence base for neonatal nutritional practice be improved much more rapidly and much more efficiently than at present? And I want to show you what I mean by variation in care and uncertainty in practice. So I'm going to show you 4 panels from a paper that was published from my group just a few weeks ago in Scientific Reports. And what it shows you is it was actually an artificial intelligence paper, but what I'm going to show you is the variation in practice in the UK. Now, this is the whole of England and Wales. This is complete population data. This is not selected data from hospitals. It is complete population data. And the first panel that's gone up, you will see shows on the vertical axis, on the y-axis, the proportion of very preterm babies, extremely preterm babies, that babies less than 29 weeks gestation, who are receiving any of their own mother's milk. And on the horizontal axis, the x-axis, you'll see postnatal age in weeks. And you'll see that in the first month, we do pretty well. 80% of these extremely preterm babies will be fed their own mother's milk. But we also know that it can be very difficult for a mum who delivers very preterm to sustain her lactation. And therefore, you will see that steady dwindling of the proportional representation of babies receiving their own mother's milk as time goes by. But if you notice that the 23 and the 24 weekers, who are the orange and the green lines, you'll see that they're still at the top. So we try very hard, and mums try extremely hard, to maintain lactation for their very immature babies. What about formula, though? Well, as the use of mum's milk, or as the availability of mum's milk declines, so too inevitably the use of formula increases. And you can see this converse representation, again in the same format, showing the proportion of babies less than 29 weeks gestation who receive any formula by postnatal age. And they mirror each other, the mum's milk and the formula. But what about donor milk from a human milk bank, pasteurized donor milk? Now, the y-axis here goes from 0 to 60%, and you'll see that any one time, only 20% of babies, and for most of the time, much less than that, receive any donor milk at all in the UK. And finally, what about fortifier, breast milk fortifier? Again, the scale is from 0 to 60%, and you'll see that around about 5 weeks of age, at most 40% of babies, but no more than 40%, are receiving any fortification. So the use of donor milk is scanty. The use of fortification is by no means universal. And these graphs really depict the uncertainty in care. So I'm going to just say a few more words now about these 2 important uncertainties. Should we be routinely fortifying human milk? Does it affect the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis? Does it improve important preterm outcomes? And if there's insufficient mum's milk, what should we use? Should we use pasteurized donor milk, or should we use preterm formula? These are questions that are major uncertainties in preterm care. Let's take fortification first of all, and I'm going to give you a quick summary here, but if you're interested in the arguments, please go to this paper, again, just out a few weeks ago, Seminars in Fetal and Neonatal Medicine on the Implications of Routine Fortification. The panel here, top right, is a figure taken from a paper by Tanis Fenton's group. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis of the nutrient content of preterm and term breast milk, published in 2014. And there are many such slides, but this is a particularly good illustration. So here on the vertical axis, you see protein content, grams of protein per 100 mils of breast milk. The dotted lines are preterm milk, and you can see that this dotted line, depicting the average protein content of preterm milk, quite high initially, and then it levels out in the first month at around 1.5 grams per 100 mils. Now, what does that mean? That means that most babies who receive at least 200 mils per kilo per day of their own mother's milk will have an adequate protein intake. And if you routinely fortify own mum's milk, it means routine fortification will provide protein intakes exceeding 5 grams per kilo per day for some babies. There's also the fact that if you use a liquid fortifier, these displace substantial volumes of own mother's milk. And there is a dose-response relationship to the benefits that come from own mother's milk. So if you displace substantial volumes, you will be reducing those benefits. There's also, of course, of note that most fortifiers are made from cow's milk. We're seeing increasingly fortifiers made from pooled human milk. I'll come on to that in a moment. But most fortifiers around the world are still made from cow's milk. So if you're concerned about using cow's milk-based products, here we have a cow's milk-based product. But there's uncertainty there too. However, the bottom line is that both very high and very low protein intakes are harmful, and the hazards of high protein intakes include all of the following: impaired neurodevelopment, obesity, abdominal adiposity, renal impairment, and high blood pressure. So again, as in life, too much is not good, too little is not good, and somewhere in the middle is the right amount. And what's the summary of really hard evidence, objective evidence that we have today? Well, this comes from the most recent systematic review published in June 2020 from the Cochrane Library on multi-nutrient fortification of human milk for preterm infants. And I'm afraid the evidence is wholly inadequate. There have been 18 trials done, but 10 of them took place more than 20 years ago. There is a huge question mark about whether these are relevant to our times. The largest trial only had 275 participants, and regardless of what outcome you looked at, and I put necrotizing enterocolitis here, 8 trials, just over 1,000 babies, a risk ratio that spans 1, absolutely insufficient evidence to determine whether or not fortification increases the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. And I think rather to the embarrassment of the entire neonatal global community, only a single trial carried out in 1996 has assessed the impact on neurodevelopment of fortification of breast milk. So it's not, and of course, showed that the jury is completely out. And so it's not surprising that these authors concluded evidence is insufficient to show whether multi-nutrient fortification has any effect on long-term growth or neurodevelopment, and there's no consistent evidence of benefits or harms, including no data that fortification increases the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. We just don't know, and this is not good for our babies. What about formula versus donor breast milk for feeding preterm or low birth weight infants when there is insufficient mother's milk? So not as sole diet, but as a supplement to mum's milk. Again, this is the most recent Cochrane systematic review and meta-analysis. Again, this is published by Maria Quigley and Nick Embleton, Bill McGuire. Wholly inadequate evidence. 12 trials, including a very small number of infants, and regardless of what outcome you look at, necrotizing enterocolitis, infection, mortality, neurodevelopment, the risk ratios all span 1. In other words, we do not know whether or not we should use formula or donor breast milk for supplementing own mother's milk. And therefore, they conclude very clearly further randomized studies are needed. We do not know of formula versus donor breast milk in situations where the expressed breast milk of the preterm or low birth weight infant's mother is not consistently available. We don't know. So to summarize here, the pros and cons of using pasteurized human milk to supplement insufficient mum's milk or preterm formula, well, we hope that pasteurized human milk may retain some non-nutritive benefits, but it may reduce motivation to express. We know that the composition and content are very variable and reflect the mum's diet, her health, her environment, the toxin she's exposed to, requires phosphate, mineral and vitamin supplements. It's very expensive. Forgive me for putting UK prices here, but from a UK milk bank, pasteurized donor milk costs £90 to £150 per litre. And although we have, this is only creeping into practice now, milk from a commercial human milk supplier is much, much more expensive. There is this growing commercialization, which is raising concerns, particularly when donors are paid. Preterm formula may also reduce motivation to express, has uncertain non-nutrient benefit, but has got a consistent composition, contains minerals, vitamins, and trace elements, is inexpensive, but it again is a commercial product, and there are ethical concerns around aggressive marketing. So I'd like to also ask all of the neonatal community to reflect on the lessons of the past. We all know that aggressive marketing of formula was damaging to babies' well-being, and that brought the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. But we should now be aware and ask the question of whether aggressive marketing and dissemination of misleading information by the commercial human milk industry should be regarded, and indeed I think it should be, regarded as unacceptable as aggressive marketing by the formula milk industry. And there have been a number of scandals around the world in relation to the purchase of milk from poor women, and these being commodified, commercialized, and sold for profit. So we need to have our eyes wide open. So just in the last few slides to end, there is strong justification for randomized studies because clinicians are divided in their practice, evidence is lacking, this causes anxiety for parents, confusion for staff, and is dangerous for patients. And when you've got uncertainty, a randomized study is the most fair and ethical approach. But we do need large numbers to detect important effects. And so, for example, a trial aiming to detect a 25% reduction from 4% to 3% in surgical necrotizing enterocolitis would require over 14,000 infants. That means national and international collaboration. So we are on a journey to deliver large, simple, efficient, pragmatic, comparative effectiveness randomized controlled trials using real-world data to make it simple, enrolling thousands of babies. We have strong parent, patient, and clinician involvement. We use a simple opt-out consent because this is comparing practices in daily use. We have a simple one-page information sheet designed by parents. We have all of our data coming from the UK National Neonatal Research Database. And we've developed a mobile phone, tablet, or online internet 2-year cognitive and language outcome assessment using a validated parent questionnaire, the Parker R. All of our data will come through our National Neonatal Research Database, which contains real-world data from every single neonatal unit in England, Wales, and Scotland, has been going for 14 years and has got a track record of supporting a variety of outputs that benefit patients. So we've done focus groups with clinicians and parents. Parents show a high level of engagement. The rationale for our studies is clear and acceptable, and the 2 studies I've described, Fortification and use of pasteurized donor milk. The need to resolve the uncertainties understood. They support opt-out consents and cluster randomization. And very interestingly, they told us that these trials help allay the anxieties that are invoked by the very uncertainties that justified the trial. And here is a very moving quote from one of our mums. She said, "NEC has blighted my family. I was born at 28 weeks and surgical NEC left me infertile. Following IVF treatment, I gave birth to premature twins, one of whom also had surgical NEC. My son and I were born 35 years apart, yet nothing has really changed. It felt like history was repeating itself." Finally, then focus group findings from clinicians. Very interestingly, we found a very strong cognitive dissonance at play because the rationale for the trials are understood, but clinicians find being forced to confront their personal views and biases very difficult And they also find it difficult to manage uncertainty in terms of explaining this uncertainty to parents and accommodating uncertainty in their own practice. And it's quite clear that the understanding of randomized controlled trial methodology needs strengthening. And a very moving quote from one of our clinicians was, "We've been asking these questions for so long and we still haven't got the answers." So to finish, there's no doubt that our cardinal focus must be supporting mums to breastfeed. We need to recognize that pasteurized human donor milk and fresh maternal milk are not equivalent, and whether we should use pasteurized human milk or preterm formula to supplement fresh mum's milk is as yet unknown. Whether pasteurized human milk and cow's milk-based fortifier affects necrotizing enterocolitis and other outcomes is unknown. I would leave you with the thought that deciding practice on the basis of personal belief or your clinician's bias is dangerous for patients. And we do need national and international collaboration in partnership with families to deliver really adequate, efficient, well-powered randomized trials to resolve these uncertainties and to move forward with patient care. So thank you all very much again. And I will leave you with this lovely picture of some of my research group. And I'd like to say thank you to the babies and their families and our collaborators and funders. Many thanks, Jen, for this invitation.
Thank you, Professor Modi. It's Jay Kim, and I just wanted to introduce myself as the moderator for those who have not attended yesterday. Neonatologist and pediatric GI here in Cincinnati. So I'm going to collapse a couple of the questions and pose it to you. There are differences across the Atlantic and internationally in terms of practice. So in the US, we tend to have lower volumes, mils per kilo per day as a practice. So that might impact on delivery of protein. And then secondarily, feeding protocols may differ depending on sites. And so the delivery of protein over that ramp up time in the feeding algorithm may be unique and different. So the question I just posed is what Dr. Kaplan had put in the chat, and that is because there are not absolute definitive trials, is it fair that we remain in equipoise and that we accept that best feeding approaches to infants are sort of open for discussion, but that human milk is best?
So Jay, lots of things in that. Thank you very much. It's good to see you again, by the way. It's a long time since we were last physically in the same spot. And these questions come up again and again all around the world, because of course these are universal questions for preterm babies and their management everywhere. So first I would say, and I would throw this back as I always do to my US friends and colleagues, why do you limit your volumes to 160 mils per kilo of mum's milk? Please don't. Please don't. We don't. It's pretty much standard practice in the UK to not limit to 160 mils per kilo. And our median average intake for very preterm babies is 200 mils per kilo. So don't be frightened. Go for it. That's the first thing I'd say. The second is that, of course, most of us, and I think this is probably the same in the United States and in most of the developed world, will use parenteral nutrition as a backup in those early days while a baby is having milk feeds advanced. So a baby's getting a good protein intake from their parenteral nutrition, and therefore to fortify at an early stage really seriously risks giving a very high protein intake to babies. So I think this is, and not only that, as I showed you from the slide from Tanis Fenton's group, the protein content of preterm milk is pretty high in the first few weeks. So one, you've got high protein content of mum's milk. Two, you've got backup with parenteral nutrition. And so for me, the need to fortify in those first few weeks is really very, very low indeed. If there is a need to fortify, and I absolutely, it's quite clear that some babies will need fortification, but not all of them. The time for them needing fortification is likely to be further on, probably as you're getting into the 5th, 6th, 7th week. and only for a brief period of time because we want to transition babies onto suckling feeds at the breast as early as possible. So, by 32, 33, 34 weeks, a baby's starting to suckle, and we certainly shouldn't be fortifying them. And then you used the phrase human milk. All human milk is not the same. So mum's milk is uniquely tailored to her own baby. And I think this conflation of the word of human milk, mum's milk, with pasteurized donor milk is actually not helpful because all milk is not the same. So I would always distinguish fresh milk from a baby's own mother, which is what we should all be striving for. And I showed you the fact that we can, we try very hard, mums try very hard, and we can all do better. But I would not conflate all human milk in one phrase.
I'm with you on that last point. I wanted to ask Dr. Patel's question. I'm just going to paraphrase it, but basically, with a lot of shifts internationally in practice, including use of donor milk, how will we establish an international community of collaboration for research if our practices are different?
That's a great question. Thank you. And that's why I put up that single slide, which I hope you found interesting and intriguing, about the fact that we've been doing focus group work with clinicians as well as with families and parents. And the views we're getting back from our clinical colleagues around the country, and we have a paper in press about this at the moment, so if you're interested, there's a lot more detail there, is that these were very honest, reflective sessions. And what emerged was that clinicians did say, we have, and I think we all can see this in our own selves, we have views and beliefs, we have biases, and we have to let them go. We have to let them go for the best interests of our patients, because look at, for example, the damage that was done because we would not let go the use of routine oxygenation at resuscitation for newborn babies. We would not let go for decades. And how much damage did that cause? So I think we as a health professional community, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, we have got to be honest with ourselves, recognize that we have strong personal biases, but if we're truly going to practice evidence-based medicine, we have to let them go. And where there is equipoise, and I showed you some of the data, which is why we do have equipoise, for example, in the use of fortification in the UK, where we've got equipoise, we should be willing, in the best interests of our patients, to put them to the test of randomization.
I'm going to end on that provocative note. I think it's a huge challenge for all of us in practice to let go of some of our biases, and I appreciate your time. There are a few more questions in the chat. If you could address them as we're moving on to the abstract session, that would be fantastic. And thanks once again for keynoting us for today.